Hello. I'm so happy to be here today. It's really good to be able to share my poetry with an audience so far away, actually. This is one of the beauties of technology. And again, I appreciate the opportunity. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Robert Whelan. I'm the Poet Laureate of Rockport, Massachusetts, which is a small fishing village and art colony on the east coast of the United States on a little cape in Massachusetts, north of Boston. I do a lot of open mics. There are a lot in the area. There are a lot of poets. It's a very active poet scene. I've been published in a variety of journals, and I do an international poetry festival every spring in April. That's National Poetry Month in the US, as well as Massachusetts specifically. This year it'll be April 27th as the big day, but the festival here starts on April 23rd. There will be Zoom opportunities both to listen and to read. I'm going to open tonight with a poem that has a very interesting future. The National Aeronautic and Space Administration is in the process of starting a moon station. And in order to do that, they are sending up information to have at that station so it will be ready to go for folks who hopefully will eventually get there. And this is a poem that's been included in something called the Lunar Codex, which is a literature that's being sent to the moon. So this is quite interesting to me. So let me get to it here. Would be good if I could read. Here it is. This is called, Can a Bridge Be Built? Can a bridge be built joining heart with mind, so compassion is seen as logical? Where passion won't render reason blind, and thoughts inspire the emotional? Can a bridge be built between body and soul, where molecules sway to transcendent music as they dance to make existence whole, and muscle enlightens the body electric? Can a bridge be built that brings hate to love, where opposites learn to tolerate, as acceptance expands through the sky above and dark impulses mitigate? Can a bridge be built to bring life to stone, its spark the zenith of creation, animating skin and bone to endure beyond annihilation? Can a bridge be built to span the flow of time, conceding its course and all its power, flowing from sources so sublime, where eternities drift in every hour. Can a bridge be built across the gorge of death to pass that height, but know no fear, without clinging to the final breath, and say farewell to all that's dear? Poetry has deep meaning and importance for me. In Japanese, the word poetry is made out of two characters. One is for temple, and the other one is for word. And I do think that poetry has with it an obligation to communicate our life, the immediacy of it, the beauty of it, the tragedy of it. It is a fingerprint, if you will, of each poet and their experience. I am a professor by profession. I'm also a psychologist and a psychotherapist. I teach behavioral sciences and philosophy. I try to unite everything together so that one reinforces the other. And I think poetry is critical at this particular point in time in the age of the earth. There is so much conflict. There is so much argument. There is so much stress between intensity and authoritarianism and freedom and choice. So that's how I try to implement it. And that's a theme that's important in my poetry. What else is important is writing about my personal life. And that means to say, not me as an individual, but me as a human being, hopefully sharing feelings and points of view that are universal. So here's one I wrote for my youngest daughter, who happened to be hearing me preparing supper, and I cut my finger on while I was trying to cut an onion, and I used interesting vocabulary. This is called As She Wraps My Wound. The white globe covered with dry, crinkled skin can beckon tears. As I slice it for dinner, it rotates in my grasp. The blade slips. Instead, I am the one who is cut. Red weeps from my fingertip. My youngest daughter, the last child still living with me, having heard my curse, responds with a Band-Aid. She is 1/5 my age, yet insists on caring for me, proclaiming to know better than I about tending small things. I am so much further along on this path we both now share that I worry I will meet the destination too soon, afraid she will not be prepared enough to complete the journey alone. As she wraps my wound, I feel better. It's also a particular day here in the United States. It's Halloween, and we all stand on the shoulders of generations before us, and Halloween is a tradition of recognizing death and ancestors and a time before, and each culture develops a ritual about it. The remnants of the original ritual are the festivities of Halloween, people dressing up in costumes, mostly children going from door to door, trick-or-treating and begging for candy. But there's also a festival that will be tomorrow in Mexico and Latin American countries called the Day of the Dead. And in that tradition, the skeletons are dressed bright clothing, they're dancing, and they're joining us for a festival. And they are called Kalaka. And I have a poem entitled Kalaka, which goes like this. What if we collected skulls like seashells on the beach and mounded them all against a wall like the Capuchins do, with long femurs stacked like firewood in neat piles, or made wind chimes out of finger bones, which did not resound with the rings of sound that spread like ripples, concentrating circles glowing in the air, but only clacked and shook together like the maraca of mortality. Would it be easier to envision Kalaka in bright clothing, dancing with joy, their grinning teeth in tongueless jaws that cannot sing? Would we be celebrating happy passings, believing the crossing over is not to darkness, but to light? Would it be easier for us to realize that we all are awaiting the pall? Would it make it any less dire to return to the earth? Like I said, the Halloween is from a prior culture. In the US, there are all kinds of cultures. We're having an identity crisis right now where some folks here won't recognize that and they won't celebrate diversity. But yet, it is diversity that made this country. And Halloween comes from an Irish festival. It's called Samhain. And it's a time when you believe your ancestors are looking at you and they're sort of judging you for your morals. It is a time where there was a white woman in a white dress who wandered the earth. It was a time when people put apples in a barrel of water and bobbed for them. And that's how they would tell the future. If they were able to catch it, their understanding would be true. And it's also a time of a silent meal where you bring the ancestors there. The costumes are because demons were walking the earth. And so today, in the US, it is, like I said, a children's festival, but this is a personal poem about a divorce on the verge of happening around Samhain. The nights creep darker and longer. Home fires are left to burn out. Smoke from their smoldering cuts the breath as it chokes. There are no embers, just a toxic scent of smudge. The dumb supper divines future love. There is appetite for nothing. Bones are showing. Weight is lost. Numb hibernation could offer respite, but it is pained by the same dream. We no longer sleep together. I sleep alone on the futon bought for our first apartment and drift into liminal space. A huge tree grows from my chest, roots clutching my heart. It falls, leaving a gaping hole. Only a revenant remains as a bloodless eye socket, the stare of empty sight. A headless woman dressed in white chases the night, haunted by past ancestors, shaming the failure. Tomorrow our children will be costumed as fairies, unaware of an underworld flame that devours houses, scars families. They will plead to run as beggars into an evening of tricks or treats. Also, what's important to me in my poetry is to practice forms. And these forms are exercises that help you develop your craft. And one that you may be familiar with is a guzzle. And this guzzle sort of builds on the theme of the prior poem. So it's called The Source of Heartache. Here it goes. Excuse me for a quick second. I'm recovering from a cold. Okay. No need to cough and sneeze in your ear. Here goes the poem, A Source of Heartache. Why can't you see your need to break is the poison source of your heartache? Snake that strangles with the same mistake, the poison source of your heartache. That empty hole torn in your soul is filled with anguish you won't console. Through hollow, endless demands to take, the poison source of your heartache. You retain a drive for inflicting pain that is somehow misconstrued as gain. To accumulate is a grave mistake, the poison source of your heartache. A motherless, abandoned child left to wander in the wild, misguided journeys you undertake to the poison source of your heartache. You cannot see, we each feel lost in a torrid sea, all cruelly tossed by wounds and sorrows that approximate the poison source of your heartache. A shipwrecked victim, blind in fright to a fatal anchor clinging tight. Yet as you drown, you won't forsake the poison source of your heartache. Fleeing the flames of a home on fire, your panic grips to save false desire, embracing such a worthless fake, this poisoned source of your heartache. The universe abandons all left to heed creation's call and choose to shake true love awake, or the poisoned source of your heartache. Listen to these words employed in hopes you'll glisten overjoyed. When offered kindness, please partake. Starve the poisoned source of your heartache. Two quiet truths to understand: our life will rarely bloom as planned, and Robert's heart will always break, watching the poisoned source of your heartache. Another poem here about relationships that may not first seem to be about relationships. It's a villanelle. It too has a very tight and rhyming form, and it's called Glacial Pace. The softest lands evolve at glacial pace. Rough mountains are ground slowly into hills, but tender valleys flow with light and grace. Ravines and canyons flaunt their open space, wild rivers carve, refusing to stand still. The softest lands evolve at glacial pace. Ravines and canyons flaunt their open space, wild rivers carve, refusing to stand still. The softest lands evolve at glacial pace. Whitewater rapids rise and beg the chase. White summits echo challenges and thrills. But tender valleys flow with light and grace. Storms rage and etch the rock face into lace. Velocity is part of nature's skill. The softest lands evolve at glacial pace. Seas surge, obliterate, and leave no trace. Whole continents submerge beneath their will. But tender valleys flow with light and grace. Both fast and slow emerge and interface. Sometimes creation's speed is what fulfills, but tender valleys flow with light and grace. The softest lands evolve at glacial pace. I also write sonnets, and I have one that has to do with how folks think that they can make laws as to who we can bond with, who we can couple with, who we can love. And I'd like to read it, and I'm finding it at the moment, and it is called Sorry for the delay. Actually, I don't have it here. So we'll go to a different one that's about having children. And this is called Altitude. It's a free verse. When you live at sea level, the atmosphere has specific oxygen saturation. As you climb higher and gain altitude, there's a point where it is less dense. Your body responds to this change and you get short of breath. If at some point you have to live for a while at a lofty peak, you adapt. Your breathing is fine. Until ultimately, as you climb, the air gets too thin. Sherpas in Tibet are the best at dealing with those conditions. However, once you've acclimated to this deficit, your body remembers. Returning to sea level requires no adjustment. But if later you revisit a great height, you retain your adaptation. Your body preserves the newly gained ability. Having kids is like breathing at high altitude. Before then, life has its lower level, where you breathe comfortably. Then you have children and the altitude changes. Adjustment is needed to maintain your breath. Instead of height above sea level and the oxygen density being the stressors, it is the factors of scarcity and time. When kids are little ones, you know just how far they can stray and the amount of time it will take you to get them. Gauging injury can be measured by the space of silence between wails. If a cry starts, the length of inhales is directly related to the degree of injury. Response speed correlates to depth of gasps and the expansion of quiet. As they grow older, though, conditions return to sea level and your breathing begins to become more normal. Yet, when they're grown and leave home, once more distance is unsettling. The awareness of time required to retrieve them returns, measuring the spaces between hearing their voices remains. And like breathing at high altitude, the adaptation resumes. You readjust again. You become a Sherpa, continuing to new heights, hoping the oxygen just doesn't get too thin. I have a quick 2 minutes left, and so I will read a haiku. No longer needed, the scarecrow retains his stance. Birds scratch empty fields. Thank you so much for your time and attention, and I hope this was a worthwhile expenditure of your time. Thanks again. Bye.